Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Thrive Co-Living Communities YouTube podcast. I'm Mark Stein, Thrive founder and your podcast host. We're creating sustainable, inclusive, and multi-generational residential communities. Our mission is to combat the epidemic of isolation, revitalize communities, and help others discover the many benefits of engaged community living by offering unique and ecologically sustainable co-living options. In this podcast series, join us as we discuss co-living, in addition to bringing you interesting people from around the world who are doing cool things to expand your knowledge and satisfy your curiosity. Through this podcast, learn more about our concept and see how Thrive co-living communities will bring together people from all walks of life who want to enjoy the best of independent and group living. To find out more about us, please visit our website at thrivecolivingcommunities.org. Thanks for watching and enjoy the podcast. Okay, welcome back, everybody, to the Thrive Co-Living Communities YouTube podcast. I have again, Joanna Pianco is how I pronounce it. How do you pronounce it?
Pianco.
Pianco. Pretty damn close.
Yeah, you're good.
Back with us, and she is up to here in permaculture principles. So I'm so glad to have her back, and she's agreed to be a quarterly guest with us to fill us in on what she's thinking about, what she's researching. Let me point to two previous episodes that she's done, and let's see. They'll be right up here. One was an intro to Earthflower Farms and her entry into an interest in permaculture. So a general overview. And then the second one, let's see, let's put that one up here. It's the opposite. Up here on mushrooms, anything and everything you want to know about all types of mushrooms, from edibles to psilocybin to psilocybin.
Got the edibles, the medicinals, and the spirituals.
There we go. So check those episodes out that we'll put up into one of the corners. But today we're going to talk about organic orchard management, having your own orchard at your homestead or even your small suburban home. And we're going to get some good permaculture principles about how to manage that. So, Joanna, welcome back. And
hi, it's good to be back. Always nice to be on the show.
Great. So what do you have to share with us?
Okay, so today I wanted to talk about fruit trees. And a lot of people, when they think of starting a home garden, they'll think of fruit trees, and it's like a natural first step. People love the idea of being able to go out into their garden and pick their apples off their trees and peaches and make cobbler and stuff like that. So now, speaking from personal experience, because I definitely went down this path with my family when we moved here, a lot of people do the same thing. They'll go to the Home Depot or the Lowe's, they'll go pick up whatever looks nice. Oh, this fruit tree looks nice. This fruit tree looks nice. This one too. They'll put them into their yard, and then they're picking up bug infested, spoiled fruit that is full of angry, drunken wasps off the ground. And they're just like, looking at their peach trees, the leaves all curled, wondering what the heck is going on, and worms in the apples and what the heck is going on, and nothing is growing, everything is spoiling. And you think, that like illusion of having that, peach cobbler just kind of seems to like slip through your fingers. So there is a way around that. That's what we did when my family moved here in '98 to this property. We immediately went to Home Depot that's down the street and picked up fruit trees, and that's what we did. And we have since removed every single but one of those fruit trees that is still here today, which is an Asian pear that is producing better than it ever has. And I'll tell you why further in the episode. But there are a few things to do that like little things that you can do that make it a little bit more of a educated, planned process. Fruit trees are a huge investment. even though they're only like what, like under $50 at the store. I mean, that is about 5 years of your time. You count that in, all the fertilizing, the watering, the labor, the time, the pruning. If you factor all those costs in, you realize like it's a pretty big investment. So you don't want to just go all willy-nilly on it. They also grow really big. You have to take a sort of calculated approach to installing this like feature in your yard. I mean, it is essentially like like the trees are like the bones of the permaculture system. They hold it together. They create the microclimate. Like they're a huge part of it. So if you put something in the wrong place, like you could have everything from like broken pipes to your foundation cracking, to leaves on your roof. So there's different ways to consider to avoid those like common mistakes. I'd say that the first place to go is selecting the varieties. You go to like the hardware store and you just pick whatever they have, but a lot of the time the trees that the hardware store is selling are all the leftover bare root trees that the online nurseries didn't sell, and then they'll sell them in bulk to the Home Depots and Lowe's, and that's what you're buying. And you're buying these trees that are crammed into pods with the roots like all spinning around the pods. We've all seen that when we've gone and purchased like plants or trees or bushes or anything at a hardware store. You pull it out of its pot and it's just like a cylinder bound with roots, and that is a huge problem for fruit trees. If you ever buy a fruit tree and it looks like that, throw it in the trash. It is not worth the 5 years of your time and energy to try to save that. I'm a big fan of bare root fruit trees. I think they just skip the pot. Like people are attracted to the pot. They think it's like it's ready, it's closer to being done. Absolutely not. It's the stick, the bare root stick. It is a stick with just roots hanging there. That is what you want. And there's a lot of reasons that you want that. You want that because those roots are not bound. There are very few of them. Those are going to be like the most important roots, essentially the roots that support the rest of the system. All of the little roots are going to come out of there. There's a ton of energy. A fruit tree in its dormant stage puts all of its life force from the top of the tree to the bottom of the tree, and it does vice versa when it comes to the spring. And it works with the solstices. So between the summer to the winter solstice, all the tree's energy starts moving to its roots. By winter solstice to the summer solstice, it's all in its leaves, and it cycles like that. When you're buying a bare root fruit tree, you're buying that tree when all of its energy is in the roots. So it doesn't matter if there's no leaves on it. If you plant it into the hole, which you want to prepare with lots of compost, loosen that soil, put a ring of mulch around it, not touching the bark, but a ring around it, and that tree will spring with life as soon as everything else in your garden starts waking up. That's a huge, huge thing that I support, is just getting a bare root fruit tree to start with.
There are probably some catalog nurseries that do a better job, that are more organic, that provide better stock than others. Are you comfortable recommending some that you've had good luck with?
Absolutely. So I highly recommend, and I am a huge fan of Stark Bros. Stark Bros Nursery has been around for like 100 years. They are established. They know their stuff, and their website is phenomenal. They provide filters for different zones. So if you live in zone 6, you can filter, so you will not see any zone 8 varieties. You can also filter things by organic varieties. You can filter them by the size of the tree that you want, which means like what kind of rootstock it's grafted on, because almost all fruit trees are grafted onto a rootstock. So say you've got like a small 10 by 10 yard and you want an apple tree, you really do not want a full-sized apple tree. You want to get a dwarf apple tree. So it lets you select that. And my biggest, and this is what I was going to segue into next, was my biggest thing is they provide a filter for disease-resistant varieties. And that is all I buy. I don't have time to fight with pests and stuff like that. And you will still get them, but you get them a lot less. And they are organic. They're not GMO. They just are selectively bred to be resistant to specific diseases. Like both of my peach trees are peach tree curl was it peach leaf curl disease resistant. That is a huge disease here. I live in the swamp. Like, this is a very humid area, and we get a lot of peach tree curl. I think everybody who's tried to grow peach trees and struggled with it knows what it looks like. You have the leaves blistering and spiraling, and they look just gross. And it's this fungal disease, and it really wreaks havoc on the trees. The varieties that I have do not get that, even in this area where that is so prevalent, because I chose varieties on Stark Brothers website that won't get that disease. That's so much less of a headache for me. You can fight it with spraying it, but I mean, do you want to be spraying your fruit trees? I don't. And sometimes I still do, not with chemicals, but that kind of stuff requires some heavier artillery to deal with. I also like Rain Tree. I've used them before, not as much as Stark Brothers, because I'm really a big fan of them. And then there is another catalog that goes by like 100 different names. I think like they're based out of Bloomington, Illinois, but they go by like 100 different names, and they're extremely sketchy. I've got one fruit tree from them before, and I do not recommend them. They're very notorious for sending catalogs to people's houses. I did buy a 5-in-1 grafted fruit tree from them once, in which all of the grafts died because it wasn't done correctly. So there's only a single fruit tree left on it, and I actually kept that tree around because at least the one variety of plum that survived on that grafted fruit tree was a pretty decent variety. But it pays to go from a reputable source, because like I said, it is a 5-year investment. So Stark Brothers and Rain Tree Nursery are the two that I'll speak for, with always favoring Stark Brothers just because their website is just really like second to none.
And what about the age of the stock? Do you find that that 1 to 2 years of the small ones do better than the bigger ones? Do you actually save years by going with a bigger one? What's your recommendation there? Or does it probably depends on the variety too?
It actually depends on your needs. If you have a huge property and a lot of time, go with the little ones. There's really no reason not to get them. If you have the time for it, go for it. I like the bigger one, the slightly bigger ones. I didn't mind paying a little bit more for them because they are more expensive, but they're thicker, they're larger. Stark Brothers labels them as like Supreme, which is nice because they're like a little bit of an older tree, so you get a harvest sooner. You kind of have to do the math for yourself to see, what your needs are, how much time are you willing to wait, how soon do you want your fruit, how soon do you need your fruit, and make the decision based on that. I like the Supreme ones because I don't mind spending a little bit more to get fruit sooner on my like 1/8 of an acre situation.
You also have to calculate how old you are.
So, that's true. Yeah, that's true.
How many years of fruit do you want to get?
Yeah. A lot of fruit trees, I'd say 5 years is about like that point where from a bare root fruit tree, you'll actually start seeing something, on your counter and in your pie tin.
Okay. What about treatment for diseases and bugs and things? You skew towards organic. So talk about some of the remedies that you can use to take care of them. Because I think that's one of the reasons that I hesitated. I'm in Indiana, my place is in Indiana. And I didn't do fruit trees because I was afraid I was going to have to use inorganic pesticides and herbicides in order to actually get fruit. So
yeah, it's a huge concern, and a lot of people, they end up like they get the fruit trees, they put the money in, and then like they bite the bullet and they'll end up spraying the stuff on it. And there's like so many different chemicals that you can put on fruits. But I don't know, I don't feel comfortable having that in my system, because I feel like if you start killing things, like it disrupts like the balance. if you don't really care about the permaculture principles, go for it. But like you're getting like chemical filled fruit and a backyard full of chemicals at the same time. That's not permaculture. There is one spray that I do use, and I will buy it in like a 50-pound bag. It is an organic pesticide. It's called Surround WP. It's actually just like a kaolin clay. That's all it is a kaolin clay that's spun by centrifuge to make it extremely extremely small, like really, really little pieces. And that I will use. That actually is I've started using it this year, and it's the only thing that will really keep Plum Curculio, which is something that I struggled with this year in my fruit trees. It'll keep them down. There's, nothing wrong with using it because it is just clay. It's not poison. It's not going to get into the fruit. It's not going to get into your permaculture system, and it's not going to hurt pollinators like bees and stuff either. So that's really important. Otherwise, I think that the main way to keep pests off your plants is to make sure that your plants are strong enough to withstand them. And that has to do with foliar feeding, which is fertilizing the plant through its leaves. Plants will uptake way more nutrition through the leaves than they will through their roots. They're more selective through the roots, and the pH of the soil actually determines what kind of nutrients they can take up. But the leaves are indiscriminate. It's like how they say the skin is the largest organ of your body, and you don't want to put anything on your skin that you wouldn't want to put into your mouth. It's the same thing with leaves. They'll absorb everything through their leaves and take it into the tree. So I like to use like Neptune's Harvest, organic fish fertilizer to spray it onto the trees. Epsom salt diluted in water, sprayed on the trees is really good. I'll use compost tea, spray that onto the trees, onto the leaves. Worm tea, if you have like a vermicomposting system, you can dilute the vermicompost and spray that onto the leaves. The tree will just like suck all of that up, and it makes the tree stronger. If you do have some like fungal issues or even insect issues, there is a spray, a homemade spray that I like to make that helps deal with a lot of bugs, especially in the early spring when you really do have to kind of defend your developing fruit from the dreaded curculio and other bugs that like codling moths that will come in and put worms inside the fruit. A spray that I like to make is with Dr. Bronner's Castile soap and neem oil, just organic neem oil. I'll take, if I can even recall the ratio now, honestly, the ratio really doesn't matter. You take maybe like a 3 or 4 tablespoons of the soap, tablespoon of the neem oil, mix it into, I've got like one of those big bin, those sprayers that you pump and you have like the little wand and it sprays. That's good for my operations. People have them on like a backpack. You mix that in there with some warm water. And I say warm water because it helps dilute the oil into the soap and into the water, and spray the trees down with that. That will get rid of bugs. It'll also nip any fungal diseases in the bud. And an interesting thing with neem oil is that neem oil seems to be uptaken by the leaves, and the plant uses it against bugs itself. It's really weird. It's an oil from a tree from India. And when you spray it onto your trees, the tree kind of like uses its defense mechanism itself. So a weekly spray down with that, just at least in the most sensitive stage of the tree's development, really works wonders. So in a way, like you're right, unless you really don't care, it is kind of hard to have a fruit tree without having to spray it, but you don't have to spray it with poison. You just spray it with natural things like Epsom salts that you're using in your bathtub. Trees love that. It's magnesium and sulfur. It gives the tree a lot of strength. Even milk, whole milk or yogurt diluted into water makes an amazing spray that's really rich in bioavailable calcium for the leaves to uptake. And it provides a microbiome on each leaf, kind of like how we have a microbiome on our skin, where there's beneficial bacteria and lactobacillus that help defend the tree for you. You always want to kind of like get the microbes on your side. And another thing that I love, and I highly recommend, honestly, like I can't recommend it enough. I'll do this every couple of years, but I won't do it every year, is I'll spray beneficial nematodes. They're these micro, like little bugs. They're actually like these itty bitty little worm bug things that eat hundreds of different other kind of bugs. And you spray them in the spring when it's really wet and really rainy, and they live in the environment of your food forest or your garden. They live in the grass, the leaves, the shrubs. They're just like living there, and they serve as predators to hundreds of different types of insects. And it's really nice to get them on your team too. You just spray them with the same kind of sprayer that I mentioned, or the one that I used actually screwed onto a hose. It was like kind of looked like one of those car washers that you can put under your hose, where you just like click the switch and you're spraying nematodes everywhere. But beneficial nematodes, whole milk, Epsom salt, Castile soap and neem, surround WP if you really need it. I recommend it. I'll even use it in my garden. Those are all things that are wonderful ways to prevent pests. There's another thing that you could do, and if you have chickens, I highly recommend having chickens be in the orchard. Given that you do give a little bit of an area around like the actual root base of the tree where you can maybe put like big stones, like I've put big stones around there, like kind of like paving stones, or a little fence, just so that the chickens don't start rooting, destroying like the roots of the trees. But the biggest reason that people get bugs year after year after year in their fruit trees is because infected fruit will fall on the ground. It's gross. You don't want to pick it up. There's probably wasps on it. You let it, rot there, and the bug goes back into the dirt and comes out next year. Chickens break that cycle. They are constantly on patrol. They are eating that fruit, cleaning it for you, and they're eating the bug that's in that fruit. So another benefit of having chickens underneath the base of your fruit trees, other than disturbing the pest cycle, is keeping grass away from the base of the fruit tree, which grass actually competes heavily with fruit trees' root systems. Fruit trees have very shallow root systems, and grass around the base of the roots will actually cause the fruit tree to not get nearly as many nutrients, which makes it a weaker tree, which makes it more susceptible to pests. So there's a lot of things you could do to not have to, reach for the chemical sprays, and those are quite a few options. So, I think chickens, if you have chickens, put the chickens in the orchard. All this.
What about mulch?
Okay, mulch. Yeah. I
Trees.
highly recommend mulch. I recommend it especially when the trees are young and they're still growing, which in that case, you really like, they're not having any fruit on them, so you don't have to worry about the pest cycle, but you don't want your chickens anywhere near them while they're growing before they establish. They will dig them up and destroy them, and chickens love to annihilate anything that's green. So with mulching, a lot of people will make the mistake of doing what gardeners will refer to as like the volcano, where you like picture like the base of the tree, right? And then the volcano of mulch, like that. That is terrible. It will actually start to give diseases to that very base of the root. You want to do like a crater. So you make a ring of mulch around, not touching the actual base of the tree, but around where those delicate shallow roots are all going to be expanding onto. You do need that while the tree's developing to hold the moisture, let that microbiome inside the soil kind of develop, because mulch will bring soil life, it'll bring mycelium into the soil. So every single young fruit tree, bare root fruit tree that you plant should always have that ring of mulch around it, not touching the actual trunk of the tree. Keeping it at least like 4 to 6 inches away from it. But definitely, once the tree's established, though, the chickens will actually produce like a mulch of their own. I throw all of my weeds from my garden there where the fruit tree is in the chicken run, and they'll eat that, they'll poop on it, they'll rip it up, they'll step on it, and it creates mulch. And the soil level has actually raised 6 inches since I put the chickens underneath the pear tree, actually.
And I think chicken manure is fairly acidic, so that's not a problem for the trees.
It really doesn't seem to bother my trees. I do add like woody was it carbon to the area, whether it's wood shavings, dried leaves. That's a huge thing that I'll do actually in the fall. And essentially once the trees get big enough, they do it themselves, where the leaf drop adds a lot of that dry, crispy carbon, and it really balances with the chicken manure. I've never had an issue with the acidity bothering my trees. Honestly, like I've heard that before. I personally have not had that experience. I have a pH monitor and I pH test all sorts of areas in my soil, and I've never had any increase in acidity from just raw chicken manure hanging out there.
What about supporting the tree when it's in its, I don't know, infancy, adolescence? When and how do you do it so it doesn't harm the tree? Or do you even need to do it?
I would do it. I do it when the tree is young. The tree is young, and if you don't give it like a good support in the very beginning, when it's really kind of like building its scaffold, forming its anchor, you could get a tree that ends up being kind of like a little, and then once it's established, like there's really nothing you can do about it. There is an old country method where people do intentionally bend the trunk so that the canopy is lower to the ground. So essentially you could take a full-size fruit tree that would stand like this, you bend it like this, and suddenly you're standing at ground level, able to pick from the top of the canopy because the tree's bent over like that. That's one method. I don't do that because you need a lot of room to do that. It's pretty like wasteful in a tight space. A normal stake in the ground works. I've used a espalier, which is it's like multiple stakes that kind of form like a cage wall, and you tie the trees so the tree doesn't really grow in its natural shape. It kind of starts like how I'm holding my arms here. It can kind of grow like that, which is really good if you're trying to grow a really flat tree. I've got one wall of trees that are my most recently planted trees of a couple of years ago that are growing that way. If you're really tight on space, that is what you want to do. It's like tree bondage. You really have to kind of like be on top of binding the tree and making sure that you're manipulating every single one of those branches to grow exactly how you like it. But the tree responds well. It'll adapt. And then once you build that like scaffold, once you build that those main branches, that system, it becomes really easy to maintain in the future, and you still get like a huge harvest off of it. I really like this book actually, the Grow a Little Fruit Tree book, and this book is by Anne Ralph, and you can see in the picture here she's standing. She's got to be like 40 feet tall because she's standing over this apple tree. But this book actually teaches you how to grow little trees, and you can do that with any tree. It doesn't have to be a dwarf variety. I like dwarf varieties. She says you don't need dwarf varieties for it, but you trim them in a specific, very high stress way to make that tree little, and it makes it easier to pick and maintain, and it develops a little bit faster. It's almost kind of like Japanese bonsai, where they grow like trees in like the little pots, and it's like these old trees, and they're like only like 6 inches tall on a slightly bigger scale. I know I'm kind of segueing away from staking, but that's all I really had to say about staking. Before I wanted to mention that this is like a good option for people that are like looking for like a smaller, more manageable way to keep an orchard.
What about deer? I live in the country, and having fruit trees, that's another reason. So would you fence off each tree? Would you fence an entire area? And the fencing for deer has to be pretty high, 8 feet. What do you
Deer
do?
are terrible. We've got fencing around the entire property. We get a lot of deer here. I know I'm in like Chicago in the city, but I live down the street from a forest preserve, and we get like deer walking around like the front yard in the middle of the night. They're a very hard thing to deal with. That's a little harder. I have this, it's called the Yard Defender. It's a thing that goes onto your sprinkler. So you hook your not, well, it is a sprinkler. It goes onto your hose. You hook your hose up to it and you put it on a stake. It comes with a stake and you put it in your yard, and you can put it in your orchard. And what it is a motion detector on essentially a water turret. And as soon as it detects something walking around, it blasts like pressured water at it. And that is another good option that isn't fencing to deal with them, because most animals, when they're sprayed with water, will run away from it. You could do that. You could just set up a couple of those, a little system of the yard defenders around your orchard, and that it helps. It helps a lot, actually. Keeps rabbits away too. Any animals or neighbors or dogs or anything like that out of an area. I really recommend that. And I've used like predator urine in the past. Coyote, wolf, bobcat, all those. Bobcat, those are mostly for smaller animals, but deer don't like it either, like the wolf urine and stuff like that. Like you put that around your yard, they can sense it. They don't really like it. They'll stay away.
What about mothballs? I think I'd heard that they repel certain things.
Yeah,
Me.
yeah, oh, me too. My grandma used to love to put those in the garden. I remember those from my childhood, but I don't use them. Yeah, I don't know. It might be a grandma thing. I've never used them, but I remember when I was a kid, she was always putting those all over the garden.
Yeah, it reminds me of an off-color joke that I've never told one on the podcast. Have you ever smelled mothballs?
Uh-huh.
It's kind of hard to get their little legs apart, isn't it?
That's terrible.
We'll see if we get any comments on that. That way we'll know who's watching.
Right. Comment below if you got the joke, but don't say what the joke is. Just leave a comment.
Yeah, and if you hated it, give a thumbs down.
Give a thumbs down, or if you loved it, put a little butterfly emoji down there.
Yeah, and then you'll get lots more peppered through all the podcasts. I've got plenty where that came from.
Oh, I love it. I've got another book that I wanted to recommend, and this is like one that I picked up at a garage sale a while ago and ended up really loving. This one right here is a really good guide to food forestry, and it's called How to Make a Forest Garden. You can see there's like a forest. This book right here is by Mr. Patrick Whitefield. Okay. And it's a really good guide just to have on hand. It covers like the basic principles of permaculture. And what's really important is it also covers the layout of the design, which is something I'm going to get into shortly. But also talks about what I was saying, like how to choose your plants. It gives details on over 100 different varieties of plants, from apples to mushrooms. A comprehensive account of perennial and self-seeding vegetables. So basically vegetables, you can put seeds down once and then they'll grow themselves, and you just come back and kind of like forage from your garden. Step-by-step guide to creating the garden, and then like details and examples of gardens, pictures, and all that. So it's a wonderful reference to have on hand. I found it really helpful. But the layout is something I wanted to talk about. It's on my schedule here, because that is another aspect to planning your orchard, is deciding where things go. Like you don't want to put things too close to the foundation of your house. You don't want to put something tall like by the roof of your house. You don't want to put something in an area where you're not going to be able to easily go and get it. Oh, here, this is what I was talking about, that when we were talking about staking, the espalier. That's what it looks like.
Okay.
So that's like heavy staking, like high stress staking. You're taking off anything that isn't where you want it to be. So that's an example of what I meant by that. Really good method though. Here, I wanted to
you reminded me of this, and I've never asked a guest to do this, but I think you would be the best one for it, because of all the books that you bring on. And we'll we'll put those in the show notes and send the list to us. But after our podcast, take a photograph of the plant section of your bookcase and let us see.
You mean my bookcase?
Yes. That's all. And
yeah, I could do that.
Close enough that we can see the spines of the books and some of the titles that are there.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I've got a lot in there. I always like to bring a couple books to my episodes here because I feel like that's the way I learned. Practice in books. I did go to permaculture classes at the University of Oregon, but honestly, like just the biggest experience that I got was from just opening up books and studying them and then practicing in like an experimental garden, which is what I call my garden, like my experimental garden at home. And I really recommend anybody that wants to do it to just do the same. I'd be happy to do that. I'd be happy to do that and happy to share. This is examples of layouts and what this book has. I don't know if you can see that. That's like a layout. Oh, good. That's a layout of like a keystone. It's a kind of like a cul-de-sac, right? See, you got like the flat espalier trees, those ones that I just showed you that are grown to be flat and wide along the edges, along the perimeter here, because you can add an extra fruit tree and then also ends up serving as like a privacy hedge. You've got some other trees growing here, smaller shrubs closer underneath the canopy of the tree and closer to the path. You have everything kind of at a grade going up to like the tallest and a walking space for you because you're part of the permaculture system too. If you were right here looking in on that system, it would look like this. Okay. So that makes sense. It's pretty comfortable for harvesting things. Just reach over the smaller shrub and, pick the fruit that's up high, up taller. You've got plenty of space. Anybody that's in a wheelchair could be able to access it. It's things like this that need to be considered when you're planting a fruit tree, that you're not just like putting these trees all over the place and then like, what the heck did I do in 5 years? And
you need to be able to get the ladder in there to get up.
Absolutely. Pick the fruit. Yeah. Okay. We got like a more bigger garden. There's like a design for like, kind of a little bit more of a wild design, less basic. My garden actually, it looks like this. I have like a keystone type situation in my whole garden, but here's a different approach. Also really wide paths. Speaking from experience, never underestimate how large you need your path to be. If you are looking at your footpath and you're like, man, that's too wide, I could totally stick another tree in there. Don't don't do it. Paths shrink as the forest grows. Sure. Yeah. When you plant the forest, the fruit trees, they're one part of it, but they take a while to mature. And there's other things that form like the layers. If you look at a forest, it's not all trees, right? You go to the forest. If I go to the forest down the block here, I see trees. I also see wild grapevines climbing up the trees. There's shrubs. There's ground cover, like little crawling plants that are just covering the ground so the ground's not exposed, because nature hates exposed ground. And then there's what we call weeds, but what are actually herbs growing in patches all through the forest. And we can take that design because it doesn't require any human maintenance to do that. That's doing itself all on its own, and it's able to feed an entire ecosystem. And then when humans put an orchard together and they're suddenly out there all the time maintaining it, take some, principles from nature and build it in that way where you're just replacing all those varieties with things that you want to cultivate, with things that you want to forage. So the tall trees are the bones of the system. They really support everything, but underneath it, like in my food forest, I've got thornless blackberries, thornless raspberries. They're like lower, they don't mind shade, they produce a bunch of fruit. And I always say thornless, and this goes with selecting varieties. Don't be dumb, pick thornless varieties. You will thank me later, because blackberries really suck and they're really sharp, and it makes it more of a pain in the butt to go and like pick berries if you're getting pricked by them. So
Or to pick fruit off your trees if you're having to
yeah,
climb in the hole.
absolutely. You know, they'll grab you and stuff, but you know, you put those, and I also really love putting strawberries on the very bottom. So like that first year, like if you were to take your backyard, get rid of all the grass by putting a piece of contract or pieces of contractor's paper or cardboard, dumping 6 to 8 inches of wood chips on top of it, and then waiting like over the winter, and now it's spring, we're putting fruit trees in. You go to the Stark Brothers, you pick your disease resistant fruit varieties, and you dig the hole, fill it with some compost, loosen soil, put the bare root fruit tree in, a ring of mulch around it. What you want to do next is fill in the spaces in between with those berry bushes, which you can actually also get on Stark Brothers, and bare root strawberries. You plant them in just those little spaces in between, the closest to your footpath. They'll spread like crazy. You'll get pounds and pounds of strawberries before you even get a single apple. Eventually, strawberries run away and they won't be producing as much. They'll go a little wild once your fruit trees and your berry bushes develop, but you've gotten pounds and pounds of strawberries all those years, those 5 years that you spent waiting for apples. You were harvesting things that were in the lower levels. You'll harvest your strawberries first, you'll harvest your berries next, and then eventually those apples and peaches and pears will be ready to pick too, and the system will just balance itself out. Also, herbs and different vegetables can grow perfectly fine just wildly in the food forest garden. You don't have to plant them every single year. There are a lot of like perennial vegetables like asparagus. I've got little asparagus patches here and there in my garden. And I also really like comfrey. I get this variety of comfrey called Bocking, I think it's Bocking 14. And what I like about this particular variety is that it doesn't spread by seed because it can be quite invasive, but Bocking needs to be spread by root. So it'll just form a little tuft where it's at. And it's actually a really nice gift to give people. You just dig up like a tiny bit of root and you can give somebody and they'll get a whole plant out of that. But it's really medicinal. You can use it for healing your bones. It's got a nickname, bone and knit, because it'll knit your bones back together. It's really rich in minerals, and it can be used medicinally. But the way that it does it is it acts like a mine for the forest. You've got your topsoil on top of your bedrock on any garden, and what comfrey does is its roots go so deep into the soil. It goes like 10 feet, 20 feet. It goes really deep into the soil and it acts as a mine. So it'll go all the way down to that bedrock layer and start pulling minerals up. And it pulls minerals up and takes it into its foliage. And part of why it's super like hard to get rid of once you put it down is because you could weed whack the whole thing 5 times a year and it will still come back. But what you're doing is you're generating biomass. And you take these leaves, you chop them, you drop them around your fruit trees, and you're creating mulch that you don't need to buy and import, that's rich in minerals, that will decompose on site, feed the microbiome of the soil, and your chickens will actually very gladly eat it too. My chickens love comfrey. They are obsessed with it. It's super nutritious and they like know it, so they really like it. Makes a good livestock feed that way, but acting as that mineral mine, and it won't interfere with the fruit trees because its roots grow down deep as opposed to wide, like how grass grows and how fruit tree roots grow.
Okay, there's an important topic that we cannot miss.
Okay.
And that is pruning fruit trees.
Yes, absolutely.
Because I think a lot of people want to get those lollipop bushy parts, and probably people hesitate to get trees generally and fruit trees because they don't know how to prune them. So give us what you can without a demonstration, and maybe sometime we'll get you on to do some demos on video.
I would love to. Actually, on my YouTube channel, YouTube Earthflower Farms, I'll do little videos of myself, like actually in action in the garden, because it is for our videos here, it is a little hard to take my like computer here outside.
Right.
But Yeah, pruning is actually something that can make or break the success of your garden. It really is like a number one thing that people mess up when they go and they get their fruit trees at Home Depot and then come and, put in the yard expecting to get pounds of fruit trees and end up getting nothing. There are certain principles that you have to follow. It's relatively simple. It becomes second nature once you've done it a few times. This book, going back to this book, they talk like this book is about pruning. Like pruning is what makes fruit trees little. And I found it a great resource for learning like the basics of how to prune it, how to know what to prune. You always want to get rid of, there's, let's see if I can get this off the top of my head. It's like the 4 Ds. It's like dead, diagonal, diseased, and I think disfigured or something. I think that those are the 4 Ds. I'm making these up because I can't remember them off the top of my head, but you kind of get the gist. You want to get rid of anything that's dead, any branches that are dead. You also want to get any branches that are diagonal, so any branches that are doing this with other branches. Picture that in 5 years and you get 2 big branches and suddenly you can't get in there. And what that does is it ruins airflow, creates a great ground for diseases, fungal infections and stuff like that. Also, you also want to get rid of anything that is diseased, that looks like it has disease on it, and you want to make sure that you sterilize your pruners. You cannot just like keep them in your garage, go prune your trees, put them back in your garage, cut some diseased parts off of one tree, move on to another tree and start cutting that tree. I will not prune without a bottle of rubbing alcohol with me. Between every tree, I will clean my pruners. Even while I'm working on the same tree, if I have to deal with some diseased areas, I will sterilize my pruners real quick before moving on to the job. Got a little like saw, a little hand saw too. All that stuff is just really important to keep clean so that you prevent the spread of disease. But one thing to look out for when you're pruning your trees is to prune outward. You want your tree to have a like a pattern like that, because that's easy to harvest. But if you let things grow, like branches grow inside toward the tree, you're going to get a huge mess that becomes inaccessible to you. So when you're looking at a tree in the summer, you can't really see what's going on, which is fine because summer is not for pruning. When the leaves drop, and I prune here in Chicago, zone 6A, I prune in January. When it's still cold, it's pretty sterile out too because it's freezing out there. So I don't have to worry about like disease, fungal stuff hopping into my tree while those wounds are open. It gives them some time to kind of callus over. You look at the tree, you can just see the scaffold of it beautifully. And when you look at it and you learn to know what to look for, it becomes really second nature to find the branches that you're going to be getting rid of. And first thing you look for is any ones that are pointing inside. Get rid of those indiscriminately. You do not want any branches pointing inside the tree. They all should be going outside. Any branches that are crossing other branches, get rid of it. People are afraid to prune too much. I'd say prune as much as you can. Prune that tree down to a nub. Grow a little fruit tree. The first year that you put that bare root fruit tree in, she says to cut it down to 6 inches. So here I am buying a beautiful supreme specimen that's 4 feet tall from Stark Brothers. It comes in the mail. I put it into the ground and I chop that thing down to 6 inches. It hurts. It hurts, but it's worth it, because if you look at this little tree that she's standing next to, look at its trunk. Yeah. How tall is that trunk? That's a 6-inch tall trunk. And that means that this tree is easy for her to access all the way up there.
Yeah.
So it.
What about putting something over the wounds? You talked a little bit, you just glazed over it. If you do it in the wintertime or you do it at the appropriate time, do you not need to do that? Talk a little bit about that.
I usually don't. I usually just trust the winter with it being pretty sterile and freezing out there. I've never done that before. I don't know if it might be different in tropical areas because I don't live in a tropical area when it comes to having to um, like put anything on those wounds. I feel like hydrogen peroxide might be a good option, but that's just a speculation. I don't know too much about that from experience, but I personally just prune in the dead of winter and don't put anything on the wounds. Just kind of trust the cold to sterilize it.
Okay. So we've talked about a lot. Are there any major aspects of orchard maintenance that we haven't hit on? The major types.
Let me see. Got my list here. Oh yeah, it's actually the last thing on my list, and it's establishing balance with nature. And this is this is a little bit of a harder topic because it's out of your hands. This one is nothing you can spray on, nothing you could prune away, nothing you could stake down. This is the process of your food forest growing, maturing, and the balance that it has with the world around it. A wonderful movie that if you want to know more about this topic, make sure you bookmark The Biggest Little Farm. I don't know if you've seen that movie, but that movie is all about this topic right now that I'm about to talk about, is that establishing balance with nature. In The Biggest Little Farm, we have the director, it's a couple, a married couple, Molly and John Chester, who they left their like old lives in Los Angeles and they bought like an 81-acre farm in like Ventura County, California. They called it Apricot Lane Farms, and they spent 7 years over now, because it's been a while since they started it, transforming that like former apricot orchard into a permaculture like haven. They actually had hired a permaculturalist while they were doing the whole thing, and they kind of talk about like how, he like talks like me, he's like, do this, and they're like, it doesn't sound like it makes sense, but I guess we're paying this guy, so they're listening to him, and like okay, so the first thing he tells us is to rip everything out and build a composter with worms and spray this like soil that, I mean, in the movie they cannot get anything like a shovel into the ground more than like a centimeter. Like it was dry, arid, rocky soil. And what he taught them was he wanted them to build this huge composter and spray everything with worm castings, worm tea, irrigate everything with that, eventually cover cropping it, then bringing animals in to eat the cover crop, poop on it, stamp it down, mow it down, and it built up those soil layers. And from that, they were able to really get the foundation of their farm and their fruit trees. But I mean, this movie is like heartbreaking because you see all this work that they're doing, and they're doing all the permaculture things right. They're doing everything. They're under the guise of this expert, and things are going wrong. They're animals dying, they're losing chickens, the birds are eating their fruit, they like haven't had a good harvest in years, and and the guy's just like, trust the process, and then eventually everything comes into balance. But the thing that I'm trying to reference this movie for is that it did take them about 7 years, and a lot of permaculturists do give like 7 years to really establish that balance with nature, and that's the outside of your homestead, the outside of your farm. You get coyotes in, you get gophers that will uproot your fruit trees, you get owls, birds, and everything. All of that stuff will come to your landscape once you start making a beautiful, hospitable habitat for them, but it'll come at your cost for a little while. You'll lose apples, you'll lose peaches, you'll lose your fruit to birds. Eventually owls will move in, eagles and hawks will move in, and then those birds will move on, and you're able to get harvests. You'll get gophers that dig up your fruit trees. Eventually you establish a balance with like the coyotes in the area, and they can come and help take care of that so that you don't get an infestation of them, snails that love the cover crop, and they start plaguing the trees and eating all the citrus leaves, and meaning that the tree doesn't have enough energy to harvest it. And you start bringing ducks into the area, and you're feeding your ducks on your pests. So you kind of really have to sit back and see what nature is doing, observe it, and kind of copy it. But it's just, I feel like that's like a huge, really important, like, last word on the permaculture process, is that not every year you're going to have a good year. This year I didn't have any plums on one of my trees and any peaches on both of my trees because of Plum Curculio. Never had it before. Had great plums last year. I must have had a couple plums with Plum Curculios. I didn't do anything about it. And this year, three of my trees were fruitless because of the Plum Curculio. So I took a step back, observed it, looked up more information on the Plum Curculio, and now I'm treating it. I'm also going to move my chickens underneath those trees so that when the curculio comes out in the spring, after the petals drop off of the trees after they've been pollinated, they start coming out, and my chickens will be there waiting for this bug to come out. Bringing birds in, really kind of pulling the strings of the permaculture system and emulating nature, being like the weaver of the system, is a huge part of it.
Nice. And a good way to tie it together. You remind me of the last garden that I had. It was several drought years, and not only did I not get anything of the normal crops, but even the deer dug up my sweet potatoes. And I've not had anything bother sweet potatoes. They pulled them up by the plant and kicked them out, and before they were even ready. And it was like, nope, you're not going to get anything out of the garden, because that was my last hope. Oh, at least I'll get my sweet potatoes. Nope, you're not getting anything, bub. So it can be heartbreaking for sure when you put all that energy in, and you're weeding and you're mulching. I mulched as heavily as I could during that drought period. So it can be really hard. So hearing you tie it together with some sense of perspective, that you're not going to win every year. You're not going to get everything every year. So focus on the long term is a good permaculture message there.
Yeah,
So
yeah. Even if you're doing it all right, you're still a part of the natural system. And truth of the matter is if there's a drought and you're still watering, you're still mulching, newsflash, you are the good environment, and the animals will come to you.
so if people want to reach out to you for advice, and talk about the business part of the consulting part of your business, so give yourself a full plug. How do people reach you? What are you specializing in at this moment? Draw us to you.
All right, yeah. So on my website, earthflowerfarms.com, or .co. It's not com, it's co, C-O, earthflowerfarms.co. You can reach me out there. I'll also, I'm having an issue with my email right now. I lost that old one that I had, so I can give you something that you can put in the description where you could contact me. But I just offer like a helping hand. If you've got questions about your garden, want to install a food forest, really just kind of like a consulting, like we did today with fruit trees. Like if you got more personal questions, like, hey, I'm having issues with these plum curculios, what do I do about this? I'm always happy to help, whether it's like you're just installing a garden or you're trying to keep up with what you've already got. Also got my YouTube channel, Earthflower Farms, on YouTube, if you want to just kind of track the progress of my garden with me, which is what I've been documenting for a few years now, several years actually, and watch how this thing grows and all the changes that happen to it, in anticipation for your own garden doing the same thing. That's a good place to reach me. Yeah.
And I want you at our first Thrive location to be our resident horticulturist. Easy for me to say, you know what I mean.
I know what you
Uh,
mean.
I want you living there so that you can guide us on creating a beautiful, sustainable, not only landscape, but vegetables. And uh, you're just a great resource. So
I would be honored to.
I always look forward to having you on. We'll have you on in another couple of months. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. You're very generous with your knowledge and opinions, and I really appreciate that.
Oh, it's always
So
good to be on. I look forward to these podcasts. Like I said, when someone gives me a venue, an excuse to talk about all the nerdy stuff nobody wants to hear about in my normal life, I'm always happy to share and just like talk to you and everybody. Yeah, love it.
great. So everybody, thanks for tuning in. This is particularly valuable information, especially if you're into permaculture and gardening. We have all sorts of topics and guests on a weekly basis, so please tune in. You can support the channel and our organization with many different platforms, and those are down in the show notes here. I know where that is. I don't know where the podcast episodes are posted up there, but I know that down in the show notes, we've got the different ways to support us. Take a look at us at thrivecolivingcommunities.org and tune in on a weekly basis. If you like what we do, please do share it, like it, subscribe on YouTube, and you can find us on all the major audio podcast channels. So, Joanna, thanks again, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us for another great episode of the Thrive Co-Living Communities YouTube podcast. To learn more about our mission and how you can support our vision of creating co-living communities worldwide, please visit us at thrivecolivingcommunities.org. To receive advanced viewings of our podcast and other exclusive content, find us on Patreon at patreon.com/Thrive Co-Living Communities. You can also learn more ways to support our mission in the show notes below. Amazon Smile, GoFundMe, Kroger, and our own Thrive Gear store, where you can buy t-shirts, hats, and many other items. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon.